I realized that the window that we have to make an impact and to do this is super small, because COVID, to be honest, bought us a little bit of additional time, because gymnastics, they couldn't do anything in the competition space at all. Nobody really could, including ourselves. And so that gave us a little bit more time to be organized. But gymnastics has started to come back around. They started to ask for different athletes for things like the World Games, which is coming up in Birmingham in July. They asked for several female athletes. And we do talk to gymnastics, to be fully transparent. We've tried to keep that door open for communication, just so we know kind of what they're up to, what their interests are, and maybe where things are headed next. But I've also had a very frank discussion with, one of the kind of senior execs at USAG, saying, what if parkour isn't ready for the Olympics? Because we feel that, and I would say that we're trying to represent the community here. And so if folks feel differently, please reach out to us. But we get the sense that even within parkour competitions, even though they've been around for a while, we're still kind of finding that happy medium. And what do parkour competitions look like, and what would that look like for the Olympics? And there's speed, skill, style, which sport parkour and several others, I think, really, Apex had its own circuit for a bit, and we're really kind of pioneering in this space. And so those are kind of the tried and true formats, but we do want to encourage like maximum flexibility and creativity with that stuff. So even as we start to look at creating more of a national circuit, we want people to experiment with different formats. We'd love to have Chase Tag be a part of that. And in fact, we've partnered with World Chase Tag, and try and provide some support or insurance for this next event that's coming up. But yeah, we'd love for that to be a part of it. If if gyms want to start doing parkour speed relays to make it more team-based, I think that's a phenomenal idea. We'd love to see some speed courses that have ascent and descent. There was actually a really interesting course in Tokyo that was maybe a month or two ago, and I'm not actually sure if that was Japanese gymnastics sponsored or not, but it was pretty interesting because it did have an up-down portion where you had to do some pretty quick 180s and climb ups, and then do a big drop and roll afterwards to kind of make that part of the course. So we do want to see that sort of creativity play out, because we just feel that we haven't found the sweet spot. And you'll hear me compare it to skateboarding all the time, because skateboarding has very recently come into the Olympics this last year. But skating has had almost 40 years to develop. And I think that we're kind of on more of a 10 to 15 year point where, if we were to compare this to where skating is right now, we're kind of in like the late 80s, early 90s, when, skating started to be a little bit more commercialized. You had obviously Tony Hawk's generation bringing a lot of like business. They were savvy entrepreneurs, creating their own skate brands, bringing more money into the sport, and then creating those different kind of competition formats that became the X Games. And you had a bunch of those different formats like Big Trick or doubles, or and some of those didn't stick around. They were in X Games for a couple of years, and then they realized either it doesn't televise well, or it just wasn't that representative of skating, and so they nixed it later. And I think we're about to enter that phase, especially for competitions at this point.
What are the risks of getting into the Olympics? I mean, so, for the people that are, wondering like, hey, so why does this matter for me? Like what are the things that might happen if we get into the Olympics too early, or without unification, or without agreeing on competition formats, for example, or, if FIG just kind of muscles us around, what are these potential worst case scenarios? And then we can talk about, the best case scenarios.
Sure. So, I would just say that the risk is basically the fact that it can just water down the sport overall. So I think people have even seen some of the pseudo kind of parkour gymnastics competitions that have been put on. They do it via a vehicle called FISE or FISE. And that has a bunch of BMX and skateboarding and other types of things. And So we've seen some of those speed competitions come out, and there's still like some great parkour athletes, especially in Europe, that were participating in those. But we felt like it wasn't super representative of parkour. Essentially was just like a speed run across a couple railings. There were a couple vaults in there, and that was pretty much it. And it just didn't have much variety and wasn't that exciting to watch. And if like it's your sport, like I do parkour, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't excited watching that. And so if you're not excited watching your own sport, or like even if you know the people like kind of getting hyped up to like cheer for them, something's off. And I feel like that is the danger of kind of letting gymnastics just kind of come in and do this, as well as because it's gymnastics and they have this professional athlete pipeline that goes all the way down to like 3 years old. You get kids in gymnastics early, they start talent scouting, and then these folks have their peak career from like 16 to 22 or something like that, and then they are kind of like throwaway athletes after that. I just don't think that's what we want to see for parkour. We want to see parkour have a longevity. We want to see it keep that creativity and not force kids to not play anymore. We're having those discussions about competitions right now, like how young is too young for youth leagues, because you still want kids to be kids and have fun and enjoy movement, rather than making it all about like, let's put you in a pipeline so that you're in the Olympics 6 years from now.
Yeah, no, I see that as a big thing, because they're absolutely going to try to map on what's been working with them for the last
Right.
couple of decades, and just try to make a square peg fit into that round hole in some way. And it'll probably be a weird amalgamation of the two if we let them do what have their way. So then on the flip side of that, what is the ideal the mission of USPK, and how can we affect the opposite, the best case scenario where that you can see?
Sure. So USPK's mission is the healthy growth and development of parkour within the US. And we believe that there's a lot of different avenues to get there. And the Olympics could factor in later, but that's definitely not our end all be all. And even then, the Olympics, in order to be an Olympic sport, you do basically have to start creating a 700-page rule book. And I just don't think that, I think even though the money is tempting, because people are like, yes, in the US specifically, there's no Ministry of Sport. So like parkour is recognized in the UK as a sport because there's a UK Ministry of Sport that said, yep, parkour is a sport. The US doesn't have that. It's all about who has the biggest balls in the room and the most money, and whoever gets the magic US Olympic Committee wand that usually comes with $1 million or more. So while that's tempting to immediately try and go after that, I think the community at large would agree that we're probably not ready for that, because we would water it down ourselves at this point. We need to kind of figure out what that pathway looks like. And for USPK, I think a lot of what we like to focus on is, enriching the community that exists. You'll hear me talk a lot about trying to create a parkour economy, which is kind of a self-sustaining economy, that there's an ecosystem where everyone is able to, there's multiple job career paths that aren't just being a professional athlete sponsored by Red Bull, because that's kind of what everyone's dream has been, right? Everyone wants to get to Dom Tomato's level of like, yep, I can, Red Bull's paying me X amount to do this, or I get paid by brands to put out content on Instagram. And while that's great, even the athletes that, I've trained and talked to Dom before, I've talked to all of those athletes that do that. And even they're kind of like, yeah, there's times where it just sucks to make content. And so we do want to make sure that there's other pathways. And one of those, of course, is a professional athlete pathway where you're doing competitions, you're getting money for those, and you can actually make more of a at least part-time or full-time living off of parkour. Then we also want to create a whole bunch of other things, and that's where USPK I think comes into play. Is there's a lot of folks in our generation who maybe had those dreams of like making it pro and doing all that stuff, but now have kind of realized like, hey, I'm probably not at my peak anymore. I need to take good care of my body. I want to keep training parkour, but I want to still be involved in the sport and kind of set up the next generation. And so the natural progression has always been to go like coach, and then after coach going to, maybe owning a gym or, running a certification or something like that. And so those are all great formats to kind of take. But we also want to offer, kind of the governance side of things where you're helping to run competitions, you're helping to, create that economy and pump up, kind of parkour businesses. That's what skating did. They all kind of supported each other via their magazines and their different brands. I just want to see more of the community kind of uplift each other, because I feel like, depending on what Facebook groups or what forums are in, you can see kind of some negativity sometimes where people are kind of ragging on each other or calling somebody out for different things. And it's just like, we need to get past that, right? Like we're in this mode where if we don't start working together and really uplifting each other all at the same time, then it makes gymnastics, take over even easier. And so that's part of the mission of USPK, is to kind of unite the community, make that parkour economy larger, bring some money into the sport, put some dotted lines, I would say, around what competition and safety and like certifications look like. Those are typically the things that national governing bodies do. And I would, also just say that even though we've talked a lot of shit about gymnastics and corrupt governance organizations and stuff like that, governance isn't all bad, right? Like it's the reason that life a lot of times can function the way it does, especially in the US. Like you can complain about government, but at the end of the day, somebody's coming around, picking up your trash, you flip the light and the electricity works. All of that usually has something to do with some form of governance and keeping a semblance of normalcy headed in the right direction. And so that's kind of the answer for parkour as well. And we've had some really good reach outs from different national governing bodies that aren't gymnastics, that are just kind of willing to lend a hand and say like, hey, I get it. You guys are overwhelmed. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on right now. They're sharing things like their strategic plans, their budgets, all of these things, just lending a helping hand, not expecting anything in return, because their sport doesn't even relate, but it's actually a good community to kind of get into to see what the next steps could be for parkour. And so that's kind of where USPK is trying to be that go-between, where we understand what other national governing bodies are doing and trying to get parkour to that next level. Because I think a lot of folks have just felt that parkour has always kind of been stalled. Why aren't we at that skating level? Why don't we have all the Tony Hawk video games, et cetera? And I think a lot of that is just time, time and maturation of the community, and then uniting and uplifting each other.
Well said.